So the first step we'll take towards planning out our project is answering a couple of big questions to help us figure out what we want to create. In our case, we're just creating a gamified art piece without worrying about gameplay or other aspects that might usually be a part of game development. This will give us a lot of creative and artistic freedom. One question I usually like to ask myself when I start any new personal project is, what am I hoping to achieve with this project? And as a result, what am I hoping to showcase? If you're new to the industry, I would generally suggest learning and showcasing a wide range of skill sets, as this will help you get a base understanding of many different workflows that might be applicable to your future job, as well as kind of help you gauge what you're most interested in doing. Answering this myself usually helps get an idea of what aspects will be most important for the scene I'm creating. For instance, if I was wanting to learn about foliage creation and hoping to showcase those skills, it would be wise to pick a scene that's full of different types of foliage, such as trees and bushes and grass and plants. Again, in this case, we are showing a wide range of skill sets. We are going over props, foliage, trims, tiling textures, terrain, and this kind of a scene with a lot of variety in there. So that's usually what I would recommend for most scenes in general. Another thing to think about is the scope of your project. Overscoping a game environment is a pretty common mistake due to underestimating the amount of time necessary to create high quality assets. So it's pretty important to kind of get a sense of what's manageable within the time frame you're hoping to finish your project in. It's always a good idea to choose quality over quantity, I would say. The average person or employer looking at your art will almost always care far more for a small scene with like 10 assets that are incredibly well made and suited for use in a AAA video game, rather than like 1,000 assets made for an entire city, but none of it looks nearly good enough to be used in an actual game. So quality over quantity any day. Like, it's way better to have art that's like very, very well made than it is to have a whole bunch of art that's just not quite good enough. So it's good to kind of think of how much time you're willing to spend on your project, whether that be weeks or months or maybe even years. It's good to kind of scope out your project accordingly to kind of pick something that fits that time frame. It's a good idea to like browse around ArtStation and kind of get a sense of what kind of scenes people have managed to create on their own before. And also, don't be afraid to ask them, like, hey, how much time did this thing take you? And kind of try and get a sense of what's reasonable and what's not. It's really good to think of that early on so that you can kind of pick a scene that's actually manageable within the time frame you're hoping to finish it in. It's also a good idea to think of what style you'd like to shoot for, so that when you're looking for a reference, you can find stuff that fits that style. So, whether that be realism or cel shaded or like hand painted art or cartoony stuff. Usually I would say realistic scenes are a good bet if you're doing it mostly for a portfolio piece to be used for applying for jobs later, just due to the fact that most games out there tend to be aiming for realism. So I would say usually that's a safe bet. But if you are wanting to work for a specific studio, working on a specific game, or if you're just really passionate about a certain art style and just want to make a cool portfolio piece, having a different art style is, of course, perfectly applicable as well. So yeah, that's just good to establish early on, just so you kind of know what kind of reference to look for, of course. So with these questions out of the way, we're in a pretty good spot to just start looking for some inspiration and reference and get a better idea of what we'll be creating. But before we do, let's quickly talk about the software we'll use use to compile all of that reference in. So as far as software goes to collect reference and kind of put together a nice board, PureRef has always been my personal go-to. It's very popular in the industry, and it's just a great, very efficient piece of software that just allows you to basically create an infinitely big reference board and just keep on drag and dropping stuff in there until you have all the reference you need. So it's super user-friendly, really nice to use, and I definitely highly recommend trying it out. For this project, however, I wanted to be able to share reference with the team more easily. So since we are working with a couple of others on this project, it's not just me alone. One of my team members suggested using Miro, which allows us to work on a cloud-based CAV reference board where we can all work together and collaborate in one file, essentially. So we can all just drag and drop images just in there and see it all updated in real time and kind of work together on this reference board. So for this specific project, I will be using Miro more heavily. Usually as an individual I would not, but in a team it makes a lot of sense. It's really nice and efficient to kind of just share that automatically with everyone you're working with. So if you are working together with others, I do recommend checking that out as well. So it's free to use as well for the first 3 boards. Alternatively, there's Mural as well, which is pretty much the same thing. I've used both. I haven't noticed too much of a difference. So both of those are good options with a lot of flexibility and different use cases. But for as far as reference gathering goes, all of these are great options. So usually where I like to start when collecting reference and kind of ideas for my project is on ArtStation and Pinterest. Those are usually 2 main websites I really browse around on a lot to just get inspired by a whole bunch of awesome art out there. ArtStation you're all familiar with, of course. I'm filtering by environment concepts right now. There's a lot of really great concept art, so it's just great to take that for inspiration. So say if I like this one a lot, for instance, which looks awesome, what I would just do is I would just drag and drop a whole bunch of these ideas into a PureRef file. So I'm just going to drag and drop this in. And basically I'll just go through and collect a whole bunch of ideas just to get inspired by. So on ArtStation, just keep on browsing, find things you like, find things that you feel passionate about. And then on Pinterest, I like to do the same, because on Pinterest, what's kind of neat is here I'm searching for temple concepts, for instance. I figured something like that could be cool. And what you'll find on Pinterest is if you click a concept piece like this one, for instance, is it usually finds pretty similar looking concepts and other art out there. So it can kind of send you down a rabbit hole if you're not careful, but it's continuously clicking through things. But honestly, I really enjoy doing this sometimes when just figuring out initial ideas, because there's just so much to go off of. So say if we open up this one, for instance, which is very similar, what we'll find is there will be similar reference to that. You can just kind of keep opening more tabs, keep opening more reference and concepts, and it's easy to gather a lot of stuff that way. But you want to filter it down a little bit, of course, to what you want to end up creating. But at this stage, I would just go in, drag and drop a bunch of this stuff into your PureRef, and then you're going to start sorting in there and figuring out what you really like most. So in my PureRef here, I've got a whole bunch of random ideas kind of sitting around, all of which I think are, pretty cool looking in their own ways. I'm not really tied to anything at this point. I'm looking for things that I might find interesting compositionally with the camera, the lighting, and the colors, or kind of a location or type of theme that I might enjoy. Like maybe I want to make an abandoned theme park, and I like that setting a lot. Or maybe I want to make just like a busy city with all cool props and stuff. Or maybe I want to make like a sci-fi scene. Or I like to keep my mind completely open to any type of ideas at this phase, and just really find a bunch of things that I might enjoy doing. Because it's very important to end up working on something that you're actually somewhat passionate about, because this will take up a good chunk of time to actually create a full environment piece. So I want to make sure we'll enjoy working on it from start to finish. You don't want to like get through it halfway and be like, I'm not really feeling this scene. I kind of wish I did something else. It's good to really have that motivation and extra drive by having something you're actually really excited about making. So definitely makes a big difference. So yeah, in this case, another thing I always keep in mind, of course, is the scope of the project, like we briefly talked about. What I really want to do is make sure I don't go overboard, make sure I don't need like a million props. Like for instance, if I were to make a theme park, I would want to make sure I don't need too many different rides and assets. Like I probably want to try and reuse a bunch of these railings in different parts. Like a scene like this church, for instance, it might look decently big, where it might look like a decent amount of work considering all the different assets. But in the end, when you break this down, it's not all that bad considering the fact that you've got a lot of reusable assets. It's very, very modular, meaning we can reuse assets quite a lot. Like if we make one pillar, we can duplicate it over many, many times. If we make one window, we can duplicate it over many times. So there's a lot of reusability in each of these assets. It's a very modular scene in the end. Whereas if we make a scene like a city with, this one's not too crazy. There's a lot going on. I mean, up here, there's a lot of variety, of course, which would be very time consuming. But the more unique assets, the more time consuming it gets, of course. So that's something to really keep in mind. It's like, you don't want to sign yourself up for needing a whole lot of props. So coming up with those thoughts, I kind of started trying to filter it down. I kind of start filtering ideas from like, okay, yeah, so this idea might be cool. Then I might try and find reference similar to that to really zone in on that idea and figure out what might fit well for that scene. So in this case, I knew I wanted to cover everything as well, because for this lesson or for this overall series of lessons, I wanted to make sure we could cover foliage, we could cover props, we could cover tiling textures and trims, we could cover some landscape stuff as well as some additional little things such as the water shader and other additional things for the scene. So that's why I really zoned in on the concepts with kind of these warm rocks and water pools, like an oasis type of area almost. It's this delicate arch, it's an actual real world location. And you don't really need to tie yourself down to a real world. You don't need to tie yourself down to a concept. You can definitely mix and match ideas as well. So in my case, I kind of try to find some real locations that kind of fit what I'm looking for, but I'm mixing concepts and different ideas to kind of make it shine a little bit more. This one, of course, fits really well. So basically, would get a nice variety of being able to make a nice small scene. I wanted to cover foliage, but I don't want to have to create an entire forest to do so. Like with an oasis, I was like, that's perfect. I can make these nice dry rocks, and we can kind of decide how many pieces of foliage we might want to make. So we can make some palm trees, we can make some larger trees, and some other things, whatever might feel like fits the scene well, without having to make a lot of content, while still making a really appealing looking scene. Quality over quantity again. Like I really want to make sure we make this look as awesome as possible without spending time on hundreds of assets that might not look that great. So very important to keep that in mind when planning out your project. So with these 4 images, what I would generally do is just find more reference that kind of fits that and just keep on filtering it further and further down and try and get as many details on your scene idea in there as possible. Just so when you were to show it to somebody else, they would instantly get what you're trying to make and what you're trying to get at. You want to try and get to that point of clarity with your project idea and reference and concepts. So yeah, that's usually kind of where I like to start, is just finding a whole bunch of reference that kind of inspires me, that might generate some ideas of what fits well for the scene. Whether that's a real world location like a nice Italian alley, or whether that's a concept piece that might look really cool, or a certain setting, or anything. That's usually a really good starting point to kind of start figuring out what I like to create. And then, just start filtering it down and get it to a point where it's ready to start working on. So with that being said, let's just look at our Miro board. As I mentioned, we will use Miro mainly for this project so we can share it with the team. So in there, I've really filtered this down a bunch to the specifics and try and make it as clear as possible with the team and with everybody else on what we're actually making. So let's dive into that. All right, so as you can see here, we've really filtered it down to the specifics, where as soon as you see this, you kind of get a pretty clear idea of the scene we'll be creating. I kind of tried to think of the different aspects where we've basically got our surroundings, which I also found a kind of matching real world location that I want to aim for, where we've basically got some really nice blue water, some lush green foliage, but surrounded by dry rocks. Which allows us to make a really nice small corner of a scene. We really don't have to go big with this. We can have a nice little corner like this. But then for additional interest, we've got actual temple structures. So this is an actual structure that we'll build in like some of these other reference images, where we'll have some awesome bricks and trims that Rogelio will be creating. So it's super exciting. I think that's going to look awesome. As well as the opportunity for some props like boats, as we can see in most of these reference images as well. We'll have some vases and a couple of additional things that are not present in these specific images. But we can always add to it, of course. So that's all. It gives us a pretty solid start. The clearer your references and the idea of your project, the easier the production of your project will be. Especially when you have real world locations like these, I find it makes my life so much easier because now I know exactly what every part of it should look like. So if I'm making like a rock texture, I know exactly what the real world kind of rocks look like. I can find more specific reference. Same for all the temple structures and stuff. Having a real location just makes it so easy to find all these cool photographs, or maybe even going there on a vacation if you desire to do so, and get very, very specific reference. Really helps you dial in all the details and pick up on all the small things that might be hard to see in like more general concepts in other images. So having a real location is something I usually really like having lying around in my reference boards. So that's kind of what I've done here. So I've kind of dialed in the specifics there, and then on the left hand side here, I've added a couple of notes to really make sense of what I've got going. So I've got my specific location. So it is set in Arizona, Havasu Falls. So this specific area here, that's kind of a main inspiration of the area it's set in. So it's very dry surroundings, almost like oasis-like area, with foliage growth happening as well. Structures are heavily inspired by Baalbek, the Temple of Bacchus, which is kind of like a Roman temple that's around 2,000 years old. So it's the reference images we see down here, which is super cool. And then, it's always good to kind of think of a story as well. Sometimes even better to start off with a story and build around that, depending on what you're making. In this case, I had a clear idea, and then, it's kind of building a story on top of that to make more sense of everything. So considering the fact that the temple is around 2,000 years old, I figured, just like what's kind of happening in real life here and there, it's recently being rediscovered by a completely different culture. It's likely not even the same culture So a couple of voyagers by boat may have come in, kind of exploring the temple, maybe even collecting some artifacts and stuff, and just kind of seeing what's going on here. So I want it to feel pretty inviting overall. I want someone to see like a thumbnail of this and kind of be sucked and pulled into it, wanting to kind of explore and see this space. So that's kind of the mood I'm going for, which, you know, all of these have pretty warm colors. Some have more round shapes. Like, I don't think I'm going for a square shape like this just because having harsh corners like that just doesn't quite feel as inviting, which is kind of why I start leaning towards some of the arches and stuff. So that's something that might change a little bit. We'll play around with some ideas there. But yeah, so overall, this wants it to feel like a nice and inviting space. And then, yeah, we can do a bunch of storytelling and kind of leaving some footsteps and trails and different things that kind of reinforce that story we have. Don't worry about the technical info for now. We'll dive deeper into all of that later. And then what I start doing afterwards is try and find as much specific reference as I possibly can. You know, sometimes there will be a little bit of back and forth between blocking out and finding reference. Like if you don't really have a clear idea of what you're making yet, it might be good to just kind of stub some ideas in Maya or Unreal Engine and get a feel for things and then find reference accordingly. In this case, I had a decently clear idea, so most of my reference was kind of found and sorted out up front. So as we can see here, for instance, the temple I was just talking about, I got some more specific reference images so I can kind of share that with a team and really make sure it's as clear as possible as to what we're making. So there's a lot to be inspired by here, but it's all kind of consistent with the same type of stone. We'll know exactly what we want to create. Same for foliage. I kind of tried to go specific. The foliage artist's way of working on this, Kat Yang, did help find some reference of her own as well to kind of clarify it even more. But I just kind of gave a basic idea of what I want to go for. And again, it's based on the same space. So it kind of gives us a good baseline to start thinking about. Then Clinton did some research on vases and stuff, found some really cool reference there. So that's exciting to kind of see where that might go, as well as specific boat reference. So kind of every part of the scene I try and find very specific reference for, so that once we start creating those assets, we don't have to think too much about what we want it to look like. We know exactly what we will be creating, and we can just refer back to this and start making it, which is a huge, huge time saver. If you leave a lot of this up for like to figure out later, it's going to be a big time sink. Like, it's very hard to design things on the fly. So just knowing what you're making up front will make your life a whole lot easier. So yeah, try to go as specific as possible. And then from that point on, we're in a pretty good spot to start blocking out. So let's just jump into Maya and get that ball rolling.